You people need to stick to what you can actually afford, Roland Voss sneered, his crisp white dress shirt and navy slacks gleaming under the bright fluorescent lights of Prestige Motors' showroom. He deliberately turned his back on Ethan Blackwell, a black man in his 30s wearing a simple green t-shirt and blue jeans, who had just asked to see the Lamborghini display. The afternoon sunlight, streaming through the glass windows, illuminated the luxury cars as Roland Voss guided a well-dressed white couple toward the same vehicles, his voice suddenly warm and accommodating. "Now these are for serious buyers," he announced loudly enough for Ethan Blackwell to hear, his hand dismissively waving toward the economy section. But what Roland Voss didn't know was that the man he'd just humiliated owned Sterling Logistics, the largest delivery company in 3 states, and had just secured a contract requiring 50 luxury vehicles for his executive fleet. The commission Roland Voss was chasing with the white couple? $15,000. The deal he'd just walked away from? $2.7 million. Welcome to Chains Broken. Here we tell the stories of those who stood tall when the world told them to kneel. If their bravery inspires you, hit subscribe and help us ensure these heroes are never forgotten. Ethan Blackwell stood motionless for a moment, his dark eyes taking in the scene with the measured calm of a man who had built an empire from nothing. The showroom buzzed with the quiet hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of mechanics working in the service bay. Overhead, fluorescent lights cast everything in sharp, unforgiving detail, including the barely concealed smirk on Roland Voss's face as he ushered Thomas and Margaret Wellington toward the very Lamborghini Huracan that Ethan had inquired about. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Ethan asked, his voice steady and professional. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Roland Voss paused in his conversation with the Wellingtons. Thomas impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit and silk tie. Margaret adorned in designer clothing that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The salesman's pale blue eyes held a mixture of annoyance and amusement as he turned back toward Ethan. "Look, friend," Roland said, the word friend dripping with condescension. "I've been selling cars for 15 years. I can spot a serious buyer from across the room." His gaze deliberately swept over Ethan's casual attire. "These vehicles start at $200,000. Maybe you'd be more comfortable looking at our certified pre-owned section over there." Near the reception desk, Naomi Park, a Korean-American woman in her late 20s, wearing a professional navy blazer and matching skirt, looked up from her paperwork. Her expression tightened as she witnessed the exchange, her fingers gripping her pen a little too tightly. She had been with Prestige Motors for 3 years and had seen Roland Voss operate before, but something about this particular interaction made her stomach turn. "I understand the price point," Ethan replied calmly. "That's exactly why I'm here. I'd like to discuss purchasing multiple vehicles." Roland Voss let out a short, harsh laugh that echoed off the polished marble floors. "Multiple vehicles? Right. And I suppose you'll be paying cash." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Other customers in the showroom began to take notice. An elderly couple examining a Mercedes sedan, a young professional looking at BMW models, and a family with teenage children browsing near the SUV section. The atmosphere grew tense as conversations quieted and attention shifted toward the unfolding confrontation. "Actually, yes," Ethan said simply. "I prefer cash transactions for fleet purchases. It simplifies the paperwork." Thomas Wellington, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to deference, exchanged a glance with his wife. Margaret Wellington, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless despite the afternoon heat, whispered something in her husband's ear. They both looked at Ethan with expressions that mixed curiosity with skepticism. Roland Voss's face reddened slightly. "Fleet purchases?" He turned to the Wellingtons with an exaggerated eye roll. "You see what I have to deal with? Some people watch too many movies and think they can just walk in here talking about buying fleets." "Perhaps," Thomas Wellington interjected with the measured tone of a retired executive. "You should hear the gentleman out. Fleet sales can be quite substantial." "Mr. Wellington, with all due respect," Roland Voss replied, his voice taking on a sycophantic quality, I can assure you that your time and mine is better spent focusing on legitimate customers. People of your obvious caliber understand the commitment required for vehicles of this magnitude." The praise made Margaret Wellington straighten slightly, a pleased smile crossing her lips. The differential treatment was stark and unmistakable. Roland Voss spoke to the Wellingtons as equals, as people worthy of respect and attention, while treating Ethan as an intrusion to be managed and dismissed. From across the showroom, Derek Owens emerged from the service area. The young black mechanic, wearing oil-stained coveralls over a white t-shirt, had been replacing air filters on a Range Rover when raised voices caught his attention. At 25, Derek had worked at Prestige Motors for 2 years, mostly keeping his head down and focusing on his work. But watching Roland Voss's performance now, he felt his jaw clench with familiar frustration. "Sir," Naomi Park finally spoke up, approaching the group with careful steps. "Perhaps I could assist this gentleman while you continue with the Wellingtons?" Roland Voss whipped around, his expression darkening. "Naomi, I can handle my own customers. Thank you very much. Besides, I think our friend here might be more comfortable somewhere else entirely." The dismissal was sharp and public, causing Naomi to take a step back. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but beneath that, something else flickered in her eyes, a growing anger at the injustice playing out before everyone. Ethan Blackwell watched this entire exchange with the patience of someone who had navigated far worse storms. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, his posture unchanged, but those who looked closely might have noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. He had built sterling logistics from a single delivery truck to a multi-million-dollar operation precisely because he knew when to push and when to wait for the right moment. "I'm not looking to cause any trouble," Ethan said, his voice carrying just enough volume for other customers to hear clearly. "I simply came here to purchase vehicles for my company. If this establishment isn't interested in my business, I'm sure there are other dealerships that would be." "Other dealerships?" Roland Voss scoffed. "Good luck with that. But hey, maybe you'll find someone desperate enough to waste their time." The elderly couple near the Mercedes, Harold and Joyce Harrison, married for 43 years, exchanged uncomfortable glances. Harold, wearing a simple button-down shirt and khakis, had served 2 tours in Vietnam and recognized injustice when he saw it. Joyce, in her floral print dress and sensible shoes, tugged gently at her husband's arm, but Harold remained fixed in place, watching the confrontation with growing dismay. Margaret Wellington, however, seemed to bask in the preferential treatment. "Roland," she said with a laugh that was meant to sound casual, but carried an edge of superiority, "don't let distractions interrupt our business. Thomas and I are ready to discuss financing options." "Of course, Mrs. Wellington," Roland Voss replied immediately, his entire demeanor shifting back to professional charm. "I was just thinking that the Huracan would be perfect for someone with your sophisticated taste. It's really a vehicle for people who understand true luxury." The contrast was devastating. The same man who had spoken to Ethan with barely concealed contempt now practically glowed with deference toward the Wellingtons. It was a master class in differential treatment based purely on appearance and assumption. Victor Salinas, the general manager of Prestige Motors, emerged from his office, overlooking the showroom floor. A man in his 40s with graying temples, wearing a dark suit and burgundy tie. He had been reviewing sales reports when the commotion drew his attention. From his elevated position, he had a clear view of the entire interaction, and what he saw made him pause with growing concern. Derek Owens had moved closer, ostensibly to clean some nearby tools, but really to hear better. His presence didn't go unnoticed by Ethan, who caught the young man's eye and saw something there. Solidarity, recognition, and barely contained anger. "Let me ask you something," Ethan said to Roland Voss, his tone still perfectly reasonable. "What exactly makes you think I can't afford these vehicles?" The question was simple, but it cut to the heart of the matter. Roland Voss's face went through several expressions as he realized he was being asked to articulate his assumptions out loud, in front of witnesses, with his manager now watching from above. Well, it's just that," Roland stammered briefly, before his arrogance reasserted itself. "Look, I know my customers. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. It's nothing personal. It's just business sense. Business sense, Ethan repeated thoughtfully. Based on what criteria exactly? The family with teenagers had stopped pretending to examine SUVs and were now openly watching. The father, a middle-aged man in casual weekend clothes, looked distinctly uncomfortable. His wife kept glancing between Ethan and Roland Voss with an expression of growing disapproval. Their teenage daughter had her phone out, and while it wasn't clear if she was recording, her attention was completely focused on the confrontation. Based on experience, Roland Voss replied defensively, I've been doing this long enough to know who's serious and who's just wasting everyone's time. Thomas Wellington shifted uncomfortably. As a retired banking executive, he had spent decades evaluating people's financial capabilities, and something about Ethan's calm confidence was registering with his professional instincts. But Roland Voss was already guiding them toward the Lamborghini, his hand gesturing expansively. Now this beauty here features a naturally aspirated V10 engine, producing over 600 horsepower. Roland began his sales pitch, his voice carrying easily across the showroom. It's the kind of vehicle that makes a statement about who you are and what you've achieved in life. The irony was thick enough to cut. Here was Roland Voss, talking about achievement and success while simultaneously dismissing someone whose actual achievements dwarfed anything the Wellingtons had accomplished. But the salesman remained blissfully unaware, caught up in his own prejudices and assumptions. Naomi Park had retreated to her desk, but she continued to watch the scene unfold with growing distress. She had joined Prestige Motors with hopes of building a career in luxury automotive sales, but moments like this made her question whether she could stomach the culture much longer. Ethan Blackwell's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it briefly, a text from his executive assistant about the urgency of finalizing the fleet purchase, but he silenced it without reading the full message. His attention remained focused on Roland Voss, who was now describing the Lamborghini's acceleration capabilities to the Wellingtons with obvious enthusiasm. 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, Roland was saying. Though of course that kind of performance is really only appreciated by drivers who understand what they're experiencing. The implication hung heavy in the air. Roland Voss wasn't just selling a car, he was selling exclusivity. Membership in a club that in his mind was defined as much by who was kept out as by who was allowed in. As the afternoon sunlight continued to stream through the dealership's windows, casting sharp shadows across the showroom floor, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. Ethan Blackwell stood quietly, his patience vast but not infinite, while Roland Voss continued to dig himself deeper into a hole whose dimensions he couldn't begin to imagine. The only question now was how long this charade would continue before the truth finally came to light. Roland Voss straightened his crisp white dress shirt and adjusted his navy slacks as he watched Ethan Blackwell examine the luxury vehicles in the main showroom. The overhead fluorescent lights cast everything in sharp clarity, illuminating the polished chrome and gleaming paint of the high-end cars that surrounded them. Natural light streamed through the massive skylights above, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere for what was about to unfold. Listen, buddy, Roland said, his voice carrying across the showroom floor with deliberate loudness. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. These vehicles, he gestured broadly at the row of Mercedes, BMWs, and Audis, start at around $60,000. The used car lot is out back, and we've got some real nice economy models that might be more in your price range. Ethan maintained his calm demeanor, his green t-shirt and blue jeans, a stark contrast to Roland's formal attire. But his posture remained confident and unbowed. I appreciate your concern, but I'm specifically interested in your luxury fleet options. Could you tell me about the maintenance packages available for multiple vehicle purchases? Roland let out a condescending chuckle that echoed through the bright showroom space. Multiple vehicles? Son, most folks are lucky if they can finance one car, let alone multiple. Why don't we start with something realistic? I've got a nice used Corolla out back, maybe 4 years old, that would be perfect for someone just starting out. The comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and several people in the showroom turned to watch the exchange. Thomas Wellington, impeccably dressed in his charcoal gray suit and silk tie, stood with his wife Margaret near a gleaming silver BMW. Margaret, elegant in her designer cream-colored dress and matching jacket, whispered something to her husband while keeping her eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. From behind the service counter, Derek Owens paused his work on a customer invoice. The young mechanic's oil-stained blue coveralls and worn work boots marked him as decidedly blue-collar, but his expression showed growing discomfort as he witnessed Roland's behavior. His hands tightened around the wrench he was holding, knuckles white with suppressed anger. Naomi Park, professional in her navy blazer and matching pencil skirt, stood near the customer service desk, sorting through paperwork. Her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of visible discomfort as Roland's words grew more pointed and discriminatory. She glanced repeatedly between Ethan and Roland, her body language suggesting an internal struggle between professional protocol and personal conscience. "Actually," Ethan said, his voice remaining steady despite the mounting provocation, "I'm interested in your premium sedan line. What kind of horsepower specifications are we looking at with the AMG models? And what's the torque rating on your hybrid luxury options?" Roland's expression shifted to one of irritated dismissal. "Look, you don't need to try to sound smart by throwing around technical terms you probably heard on some car show. These aren't the kind of vehicles that people in your situation typically consider. How about I show you something more practical?" The words landed like physical blows, but Ethan's composure never wavered. If anything, his questions became more specific and technical, revealing a depth of automotive knowledge that should have impressed any competent salesperson. "I'm particularly interested in fleet reliability data," Ethan continued. "What kind of warranty coverage do you offer on bulk purchases? And how does your service department handle coordination when multiple vehicles need simultaneous maintenance?" Roland waved his hand dismissively, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light as he gestured. "Fleet purchases? Come on now, let's keep this realistic. Why don't I introduce you to someone who can help you with financing options? We work with some very accommodating lenders who specialize in helping people with less than perfect credit situations." The assumption was so blatantly racist and unfounded that even Thomas Wellington raised his eyebrows. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her designer heels, suddenly finding great interest in examining her manicured nails. At that moment, the Wellingtons became the perfect foil for Roland's discriminatory behavior. He immediately pivoted toward them with a completely different energy, his entire demeanor transforming as if someone had flipped a switch. "Mr. and Mrs. Wellington," Roland exclaimed, his voice warm and welcoming in stark contrast to the cold dismissal he'd shown Ethan. "I can see you folks have excellent taste. You're looking at the BMW 7 Series, aren't you? Absolute perfection. The craftsmanship, the attention to detail, the sophisticated engineering. It's exactly what discerning customers like yourselves deserve." The contrast was so stark, it was almost comical, except for the ugly reality it represented. Roland's entire body language changed when addressing the white couple. His shoulders relaxed, his smile became genuine, and his voice took on the respectful, consultative tone that Ethan should have received from the beginning. "This particular model," Roland continued, running his hand lovingly along the BMW's hood, "features a twin-turbo V8 engine, premium leather appointments, and technology that's simply years ahead of the competition. I can tell just by looking at you that you understand quality and sophistication." Thomas nodded politely, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the preferential treatment, especially given the obvious discrimination happening just yards away. Derek Owens had abandoned all pretense of working and was now watching the scene with barely contained fury. His jaw was clenched tight, and he kept glancing toward Victor Salinas's office, clearly hoping the general manager would intervene. The service area provided him with a perfect vantage point to witness the full scope of Roland's discriminatory behavior, and what he was seeing was making him angrier by the minute. Naomi Park had moved closer, ostensibly to organize brochures on a nearby display table, but really to get a better sense of the situation. Her discomfort was palpable as she watched Roland fawn over the Wellingtons while continuing to ignore and dismiss Ethan. The precision German engineering is really unparalleled, Roland was saying to the Wellingtons, his voice carrying clearly across the showroom. And the resale value? Exceptional. When you buy a vehicle like this, you're making an investment, not just a purchase. I can tell you folks understand the difference between true luxury and imitations. The implicit contrast was unmistakable and deeply offensive. While Roland praised the Wellingtons' presumed sophistication and financial acumen, his treatment of Ethan suggested exactly the opposite assumptions. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, a sound that was becoming increasingly frequent. He glanced at the screen and saw his assistant's name, but politely declined the call without answering. This happened twice more in quick succession, each time with Ethan handling the situation with quiet professionalism. "Popular guy," Roland commented sarcastically, having noticed the frequent calls. "Let me guess, probably bill collectors, right? That's usually what those constant phone calls are about. All the more reason to look at something with lower monthly payments." The comment was so inappropriate and assumptive that Naomi Park actually gasped audibly. Even Margaret Wellington looked shocked at the blatant rudeness. But Ethan simply smiled slightly and said, "Business calls. I prefer to handle automotive purchases without distractions." Roland snorted derisively. "Business calls, right? Look, friend, I've been in this business for 15 years, and I can read people pretty well. Why don't you save us both some time and let me show you something more realistic? I've got a nice pre-owned Camry that would be perfect, reliable, economical, and the payments would be manageable." From his office overlooking the showroom floor, Victor Salinas had been intermittently observing the interaction. Dressed in a sharp dark suit and burgundy tie, the general manager cut an authoritative figure behind his glass walls. He'd noticed the raised voices and the unusual length of the interaction, but hadn't yet grasped the full scope of what was happening. Victor's office provided him with a perfect view of the main showroom, but he'd been juggling phone calls and paperwork, catching only fragments of the conversation below. What he could see was Roland spending an unusual amount of time with someone who didn't appear to be making progress toward a purchase, while the Wellingtons, clearly serious buyers, waited nearby. "The thing is," Roland continued, his voice growing more condescending with each sentence, "I hate to see people get in over their heads financially. Car payments can really add up, and when you factor in insurance costs on luxury vehicles, maintenance expenses, premium gas requirements, it just doesn't make sense for someone in your position to take on that kind of burden." Ethan's phone buzzed again, this time more persistently. The ringtone was clearly that of an important business call, professional and urgent. Again, Ethan declined it politely, but Roland seized on this as further evidence of his assumptions. "There it goes again," Roland said with false sympathy. "Look, I get it. Financial pressures can be overwhelming, but that's exactly why I'm trying to steer you towards something sensible. No shame in being realistic about your situation." Derek Owens had finally had enough. He set down his tools and walked closer to the showroom floor, his work boots echoing on the polished concrete. His coveralls were stained with honest work, and his expression showed barely contained outrage at what he was witnessing. "Maybe," Derek said quietly to Naomi as he passed the customer service desk, "someone should actually listen to what the man is asking for, instead of making assumptions." Naomi nodded grimly, her professional composure clearly strained by the situation unfolding before them. "This isn't right," she murmured back. "This isn't how we're supposed to treat customers." Meanwhile, Roland had returned his attention to the Wellingtons, his demeanor once again shifting to obsequious respect. "Now, for customers of your caliber, I can offer some exclusive financing options. We have relationships with premium lenders who understand quality clientele. The approval process would be seamless, and the terms would reflect your excellent standing." The contrast was becoming so obvious that even Thomas Wellington seemed uncomfortable. He exchanged a meaningful glance with his wife, and both of them looked over at Ethan, with expressions that suggested growing awareness of the unfair treatment he was receiving. Ethan's phone buzzed yet again, and this time the ringtone continued longer, suggesting it might be an emergency. He looked at the screen with slight concern, but still chose to decline the call professionally. "Busy day at the unemployment office?" Roland quipped, apparently thinking his comment was clever. The joke fell flat in the bright showroom, met with uncomfortable silence from everyone within earshot. Victor Salinas finally stood up from his desk, beginning to sense that something was seriously wrong with the situation downstairs. He moved to his office window to get a better view, his expression growing more concerned as he took in Roland's body language and the obvious tension in the showroom. The scene was set perfectly for what would come next. Roland's discriminatory behavior had escalated to an almost cartoonish level, while Ethan's dignified restraint and increasingly obvious business acumen created a tension that demanded resolution. The witnesses were all in place, each reacting according to their character, and the stage was set for the revelation that would turn everything upside down. As Ethan's phone buzzed once more, the sound seemed to echo through the bright fluorescent-lit showroom, like a harbinger of the storm that was about to break over Roland Voss's carefully constructed assumptions. The heavy glass doors of Prestige Motors swung open again, letting in another wave of afternoon sunlight that mixed with the bright fluorescent lighting overhead. A steady stream of customers began filtering into the showroom, drawn by the weekend sales event banners hanging from the ceiling. The polished concrete floors reflected the natural light streaming through the massive windows, creating an almost theatrical brightness that would make every interaction visible to all. Ethan Blackwell remained near the luxury sedan section, his green t-shirt and blue jeans making him stand out among the increasingly well-dressed clientele. He maintained his composed demeanor despite Roland Voss's continued dismissive treatment, occasionally glancing at the vehicles he'd come to evaluate, while other customers received the red carpet treatment he'd been denied. An elderly couple shuffled through the main entrance, the gentleman wearing a brown cardigan over khaki slacks, while his wife wore a floral print blouse with navy pants. Harold and Betty Harrison had been customers at Prestige Motors for over 2 decades, and their discomfort was immediate as they witnessed Roland Voss's behavior from across the showroom. Harold's weathered hands gripped his wife's arm gently as they exchanged troubled glances. "That's not how we treat people here," Betty whispered to her husband, her voice carrying just enough for nearby customers to hear. That young man asked perfectly reasonable questions about those cars. Harold nodded grimly, his eyes following Roland Voss as the salesman continued fawning over the Wellington couple near the BMW display. 30 years I've known this place. Never seen anything like this." Their whispered conversation created ripples of awareness among other customers, some beginning to pay closer attention to the dynamics playing out before them. However, not everyone shared their concern. A middle-aged man in an expensive polo shirt and golf slacks barely glanced up from his phone, seemingly indifferent to the obvious discrimination occurring just steps away. His wife, adorned with jewelry that caught the overhead lights, appeared equally disinterested as she examined her manicured nails. Near the luxury SUV section, Thomas Wellington adjusted his perfectly tailored charcoal suit jacket, while his wife Margaret smoothed her designer dress, a creation that probably cost more than many people's monthly salary. They basked in Roland Voss's attention, completely aware that their treatment came at another customer's expense, yet choosing to remain willfully blind to the injustice. "Mr. Wellington, as I was saying," Roland Voss continued, his voice carrying across the showroom, "a man of your obvious sophistication deserves the finest in automotive excellence. These vehicles are crafted for discerning individuals who understand true quality." Margaret Wellington smiled, her perfectly applied lipstick gleaming under the lights. "We do appreciate being recognized for who we are, Mr. Voss. It's so refreshing when salespeople understand their clientele." The comment hung in the air like a challenge, its implications clear to everyone within earshot. Ethan Blackwell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his composure remained intact. He'd heard variations of this theme countless times throughout his life, the coded language that separated the worthy from the unworthy, based on nothing more than appearance and assumption. From her position near the certified pre-owned section, Naomi Park felt her stomach churning with each passing minute. Her professional blazer and pencil skirt represented years of hard work to build her career in automotive sales. But watching Roland Voss's behavior made her question everything about the industry she'd chosen. The moral weight of remaining silent, pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Finally, she could no longer remain passive, straightening her shoulders and smoothing her blazer. Naomi approached with measured steps, her professional heels clicking against the polished floor. "Excuse me," she said softly, directing her attention toward Ethan Blackwell, while keeping her voice respectful. "I couldn't help but notice you've been waiting. If you'd like, I'd be happy to show you some of our luxury vehicles and answer any questions you might have." The offer was simple, professional, and exactly what should have happened when Ethan Blackwell first entered the showroom. But Roland Voss's reaction was swift and aggressive, his face flushing red as he abandoned the Wellington couple mid-sentence. "Miss Park." Roland Voss's voice cut through the showroom like a whip, causing several customers to turn their heads. "I believe I made it clear that I'm handling all the customers in this section today. This gentleman was just looking around, weren't you?" His tone carried both authority and threat, making it clear that Naomi's interference wasn't welcome. The young sales associate's face paled slightly, but she maintained her professional composure even as her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "I just thought perhaps," Naomi began. But Roland Voss cut her off with a sharp gesture. "You thought wrong. I've got years of experience reading customers, and I know exactly what everyone needs. Why don't you focus on the economy section, where you can actually help someone?" The dismissal was brutal and public, designed not just to shut down Naomi's intervention, but to reinforce the hierarchy that kept Roland Voss in control. Several customers witnessed this exchange, their reactions varying from embarrassment to outright disgust. The Harrisons looked appalled, while other customers suddenly found their phones very interesting. Ethan Blackwell watched this interaction with growing understanding. This wasn't just about him anymore. Roland Voss's behavior revealed a pattern of power and control that affected everyone around him, from customers to colleagues. The systemic nature of the problem was becoming crystal clear. The Wellington couple seemed to take perverse pleasure in watching Naomi's humiliation, as if her dressing down somehow validated their elevated status. Thomas Wellington actually chuckled softly, adjusting his gold cufflinks with obvious satisfaction. "Now that's handled," Roland Voss said, returning his attention to the Wellingtons while completely ignoring Ethan Blackwell's presence. "Let me show you the interior features of this magnificent vehicle." Just then, Ethan Blackwell's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed Sandra Mitchell, executive assistant, and given the timing, he knew it must be important. He glanced apologetically at the nearby customers before answering professionally. "Ethan Blackwell speaking." "Mr. Blackwell," Sandra's crisp, efficient voice carried clearly in the quiet showroom. "I wanted to confirm the details for the fleet purchase. The board approved the full 50-vehicle order, and the bank has prepared the letter of credit as requested. Will you be finalizing the purchase this afternoon?" The conversation was purely professional, but every word carried weight that Roland Voss completely failed to grasp. Several customers, however, began paying closer attention. The mention of a 50-vehicle fleet purchase and bank letters of credit suggested someone with serious purchasing power. "Yes, Sandra, I'm at the dealership now, evaluating the options. I'll call you back within the hour with the final specifications." "Perfect, Mr. Blackwell. The logistics team is standing by to coordinate delivery schedules once you've made your selection. Oh, and the Hartwell Industries contract needs your signature by Monday." "Understood. Thank you, Sandra." As Ethan Blackwell ended the call, the showroom had grown noticeably quieter. The professional nature of the conversation, the references to fleet purchases and corporate contracts, created cognitive dissonance for anyone who'd been observing Roland Voss's treatment of him. But Roland Voss, true to form, misinterpreted everything he'd just heard. A condescending smile spread across his face as he addressed his preferred customers, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Some people certainly like to put on a show," he said with obvious amusement. "I've seen it all in this business. Friends playing along, fake phone calls, elaborate stories. It's almost entertaining." The Harrisons exchanged horrified glances. Harold Harrison had built a successful construction company from nothing, and he recognized the terminology and professionalism he'd just witnessed. That wasn't someone putting on a show. That was a legitimate business executive handling real corporate matters. From the service area, Derek Owens had been watching the entire situation unfold. The young mechanic's oil-stained coveralls and work boots marked him as blue-collar. But his intelligence was sharp enough to connect dots that Roland Voss couldn't see. A 50-vehicle fleet purchase would represent millions in revenue, and the man being dismissed was discussing it as casually as ordering lunch. Derek caught Naomi Park's eye and nodded toward Ethan Blackwell, raising his eyebrows meaningfully. She understood immediately. They were witnessing something significant, and Roland Voss was too blinded by prejudice to recognize it. The tension in the showroom continued building as more customers became aware of the disconnect between Roland Voss's treatment of Ethan Blackwell and the obvious signs of his business success. Some customers began whispering among themselves, creating an undercurrent of conversation that suggested trouble brewing. Finally, Victor Salinas emerged from his office, having observed portions of the situation through his glass walls. The general manager wore a dark suit and tie that projected authority, but his approach to the situation immediately revealed the systemic problems plaguing Prestige Motors. Instead of addressing Roland Voss's discriminatory behavior, Victor focused his attention on what he perceived as a disruption. His body language and facial expression suggested he viewed Ethan Blackwell as the source of the problem rather than the victim of it. "Good afternoon," Victor said, his tone professionally neutral, but carrying an undertone of suspicion. "I'm Victor Salinas, the general manager. I understand there might be some confusion here. Is there a problem I can help resolve?" The question was loaded with implication. By asking if there was a problem while looking directly at Ethan Blackwell, Victor was essentially suggesting that Ethan's presence had created the disturbance. The framing of the question placed blame on the victim rather than addressing the obvious discrimination that multiple customers had witnessed. Ethan Blackwell recognized the tactic immediately. He'd encountered it countless times throughout his career. The subtle suggestion that his very presence was problematic, that his expectations were unreasonable, that any conflict must somehow be his fault. "No problem at all," Ethan replied calmly, his voice carrying across the now silent showroom. "I came in to look at luxury vehicles for a corporate fleet purchase. Mr. Voss explained that he doesn't believe I belong in that section of your showroom." Victor's eyes darted between Ethan Blackwell and Roland Voss, clearly uncomfortable with the direct statement, but unwilling to confront his top salesman. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Roland is one of our most experienced associates." The non-response spoke volumes. Rather than addressing the discrimination complaint, Victor had deflected to Roland's credentials, essentially endorsing his behavior through passive support. The management culture that enabled such treatment was now fully visible to everyone present. Naomi Park stood nearby, her earlier attempt to help having been crushed, but her eyes showed growing determination. Derek Owens continued watching from the service area, his expression making clear he'd witnessed this entire exchange and understood its implications. The Harrisons looked increasingly uncomfortable, their decades of loyalty to Prestige Motors being tested by what they were witnessing. Other customers checked their phones, some possibly documenting what they were seeing, while others simply observed with growing unease. The Wellington couple remained in their bubble of privilege, either genuinely oblivious to the injustice or choosing to ignore it in favor of maintaining their preferred status. Thomas Wellington actually seemed impatient with the distraction, wanting Roland Voss to return his full attention to their much smaller purchase. Throughout all of this, Ethan Blackwell maintained his dignity and composure, but the weight of systemic discrimination was becoming undeniable. Every person in that showroom was making a choice to challenge injustice, to enable it through silence, or to actively participate in it. The stage was set for a revelation that would expose not just Roland Voss's prejudice, but the entire culture that had allowed it to flourish unchallenged. The anticipation in the room was palpable, as if everyone sensed that something significant was about to unfold. The bright fluorescent lights of Prestige Motors' showroom cast everything in sharp relief as Ethan Blackwell stood near a gleaming Mercedes S-Class, his green t-shirt and blue jeans a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding him. He had maintained his composure through Roland Voss's increasingly offensive behavior, but when his phone began buzzing insistently in his pocket, he knew this call couldn't wait. "Excuse me," Ethan said quietly, glancing at the screen. The caller ID showed Sandra Mitchell, his executive assistant, and the red priority indicator meant emergency. "I need to take this." Roland Voss, his white dress shirt now slightly wrinkled from his animated gesturing, rolled his eyes dramatically. "Of course you do. Let me guess, another one of your business partners calling about your big deals?" He made exaggerated air quotes, drawing chuckles from Thomas Wellington, who adjusted his expensive silk tie with obvious amusement. Ethan stepped slightly away from the group, but remained within earshot as he answered. "Sandra, what's the situation?" "Mr. Blackwell, we have a critical issue with the Morrison Pharmaceuticals contract." Sandra's professional voice carried clearly through the phone's speaker. "Their distribution center in Atlanta is reporting a complete system failure. They need emergency logistics support for their time-sensitive medical supplies. We're talking about a potential $2 million operation if we can mobilize within the next 4 hours." The elderly couple who had entered earlier, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, found themselves inadvertently listening as they browsed a nearby BMW. Mrs. Harrison, wearing a powder blue cardigan and navy slacks, exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband, whose weathered hands gripped his walking cane a little tighter. "What's our current fleet capacity in the Southeast region?" Ethan asked, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions under pressure. Roland Voss smirked and stage whispered to Margaret Wellington, who wore a designer cream-colored blazer and matching pencil skirt. "Listen to this performance. This guy's really committed to his act." Margaret shifted uncomfortably, her diamond earrings catching the overhead lights as she began to pay closer attention to Ethan's conversation. Something about his tone, the specific nature of his questions, didn't sound like pretense. "We have 37 vehicles available," Sandra continued, "but Morrison needs specialized refrigerated transport for their insulin shipments. We'll need to coordinate with our Birmingham and Jacksonville facilities to pull the medical-grade fleet units. Do we have the CDC certifications current on all the refrigerated units?" Ethan asked, pulling a small notebook from his back pocket and beginning to jot down notes with practiced efficiency. "And what's the status on our insurance coverage for pharmaceutical transport?" Derek Owens, the young mechanic, had emerged from the service area to grab a parts catalog from the customer service desk. His oil-stained coveralls and work boots squeaked slightly on the polished showroom floor as he stopped, wrench still in hand, listening to the conversation with growing interest. His dark eyes moved from Ethan to Roland Voss, and the pieces were beginning to form a very different picture than what the salesman was painting. "All certifications are current, sir," Sandra replied. "I've already contacted our insurance carrier. They're expediting the coverage verification. But Mr. Blackwell, this is exactly why we need to finalize that executive fleet upgrade we've been discussing. Our current luxury transport division is running at capacity, and we're turning away high-value clients." Roland Voss let out a barely contained snort. "Executive fleet upgrade. This is getting better and better. What's next? A private jet?" Thomas Wellington, whose own business background made him more attuned to corporate speak than his wife, found himself studying Ethan more carefully. The man's posture, the way he held himself during the call, the specific technical knowledge he displayed, it didn't match Roland's assessment at all. "Sandra, remind me exactly what we discussed regarding the fleet expansion." Ethan continued, ignoring Roland's commentary. "I know we were looking at replacing our aging executive transport division." "Yes, sir. We identified the need for 50 new vehicles. A mix of luxury sedans for executive transport, SUVs for security details, and high-end commercial vehicles for our premium logistics services. The total investment we discussed was approximately $2.7 million, and you wanted to finalize the purchase this week to take advantage of the fiscal year-end pricing." The showroom seemed to grow quieter as several customers unconsciously moved closer. Even the soft jazz playing through the sound system seemed inadequate to mask the growing tension. Naomi Park, who had been organizing paperwork at her desk, looked up sharply at the mention of such a substantial purchase. Her professional blazer and skirt suddenly felt constraining as she realized what might be unfolding. 2.7 million, Ethan repeated thoughtfully. And we confirmed that the insurance savings from the newer safety features would offset approximately 15% of the annual operating costs? That's correct, Mr. Blackwell. Plus the improved fuel efficiency ratings mean we'll see substantial savings in operational overhead. I have the complete analysis ready for your review. Victor Salinas, who had been observing from his glass-walled office, set down his coffee mug with a sharp clink. His dark suit and conservative tie suddenly felt too tight as he strained to hear more of the conversation. Something was very wrong with Roland's handling of this situation, and a growing sense of unease settled in his stomach. Roland Voss, however, remained obliviously confident in his assessment. He turned to the Wellington couple with theatrical exasperation. Can you believe this guy? He's putting on quite a show for everyone. $2.7 million fleet purchase, he mimicked. I've seen this before. People trying to impress others with fake phone calls about money they'll never see. But Margaret Wellington was no longer laughing. Her business degree from Wharton had taught her to recognize authentic corporate communications, and everything about Ethan's call rang true. The specific technical details, the regulatory knowledge, the casual mention of multi-million-dollar figures, it painted a picture that contradicted everything Roland had told them. Sandra, I need you to coordinate with legal on the Morrison emergency response. Ethan continued. Make sure we have all liability waivers properly executed, and contact Jeff Richardson at our Jacksonville facility. Tell him we might need to pull some of his premium units for this operation. I'll handle that immediately, sir. But regarding the vehicle purchase, several dealerships have been calling about appointments. Should I confirm the meeting with Prestige Motors for this afternoon? Derek Owens nearly dropped his wrench. He caught Naomi Park's eye across the showroom and raised his eyebrows significantly. She responded with a barely perceptible nod, both of them beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Actually, Sandra, I'm at Prestige Motors right now, Ethan said, his voice carrying a slight edge that hadn't been there before. I'm evaluating whether they're the right fit for our executive fleet needs. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Harrison clutched her husband's arm, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Even Thomas Wellington straightened his shoulders, his business instincts alerting him that something significant was about to unfold. Roland Voss, however, remained supremely confident in his misguided assessment. Oh, this is rich, he said, loud enough for others to hear. Now he's claiming to be here for a fleet purchase. Sir, I've already told you what vehicles are in your price range. Maybe you should take your little performance somewhere else. One moment, Sandra, Ethan said, placing his hand over the phone's microphone. He looked directly at Roland Voss, with calm, steady eyes. I'm sorry, what did you just say? You heard me, Roland replied, his white dress shirt stretching across his chest as he puffed up with false authority. This whole charade is getting ridiculous. Fleet purchases, multi-million-dollar deals. Do you really think anyone here is buying this act? Victor Salinas pushed back from his desk and stood up, his instincts screaming that his salesman was making a catastrophic mistake. He started moving toward the group, but the distance felt like miles as he watched the scene unfold. Ethan lifted the phone back to his ear. Sandra, I want you to document that I'm currently being refused service at Prestige Motors due to what appears to be discriminatory practices. I'll call you back in 10 minutes with my decision on whether to proceed with our planned purchase here. Mr. Blackwell, Sandra's voice carried clearly through the speaker, her concern evident. Are you serious? Should I contact the other dealerships on our list? Mercedes of Atlanta confirmed they could handle the full order, and BMW expressed strong interest in our executive transport requirements. Let me handle this situation first. I'll call you back shortly. As Ethan ended the call, the showroom fell into an uncomfortable silence. The only sounds were the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of tools from the service area. Derek Owens wiped his hands on a shop rag, his young face showing a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had witnessed Roland's behavior toward minority customers before, but never had the consequences been so potentially explosive. Margaret Wellington found her voice first. Roland, she said carefully, Perhaps we should reconsider our timeline for purchasing. Thomas, didn't you say you wanted to compare prices at other dealerships? Thomas Wellington, reading the room with the skill of someone who had navigated corporate politics for decades, nodded slowly. Yes, darling, I think that might be wise. Roland Voss looked around the showroom, finally beginning to sense that something had shifted, but still unable to grasp the full implications. Folks, don't let this disruption affect your shopping experience. Some people just like to make scenes to get attention. Victor Salinas finally reached the group, his face flushed with exertion and growing panic. "Mr. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name," he said to Ethan, extending his hand with forced professionalism. "Blackwell," Ethan replied simply, shaking the manager's hand with a firm grip. "Ethan Blackwell." "Mr. Blackwell," Victor continued, shooting a warning glance at Roland Voss. "I hope there hasn't been any misunderstanding about our services here at Prestige Motors." Naomi Park stepped forward, her professional instincts overriding her earlier hesitation. "Mr. Blackwell, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Are you genuinely interested in purchasing vehicles for a corporate fleet?" "I am," Ethan replied, his voice steady and professional. Or rather, I was. The weight of those 3 words. I was settled over the showroom like a physical presence. Roland Voss finally began to show the first signs of uncertainty, his earlier confidence wavering as he looked around at the faces surrounding him. Derek Owens caught Naomi's eye again and nodded toward Roland Voss, his expression saying everything that couldn't be spoken aloud. The young mechanic had seen enough workplace dynamics to recognize when someone had made a career-ending mistake. The fluorescent lights continued to illuminate every detail of the unfolding drama, casting sharp shadows that seemed to emphasize the growing divide between Roland Voss and everyone else in the showroom. The stage was set for a revelation that would change everything, but for now, tension hung in the air like electricity before a storm. The fluorescent lights above cast their steady glow across the pristine showroom floor of Prestige Motors as Ethan Blackwell stood near the gleaming Mercedes S-Class, his green t-shirt and blue jeans a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding him. The natural skylight streaming through the large windows illuminated every detail of this moment that would change everything. His calm demeanor remained unchanged despite the escalating discrimination he had endured, but something in his dark eyes suggested that patience, even his remarkable patience, had limits. Roland Voss straightened his white dress shirt and adjusted his navy slacks, completely oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash upon himself. His confidence had grown with each dismissive comment, each racist assumption, each moment where his behavior had gone unchallenged by management. He had successfully redirected the Wellington couple toward their modest purchase, while keeping what he perceived as an undesirable customer at bay. In his twisted logic, this represented a victory of professional salesmanship. Thomas Wellington, impeccably dressed in his charcoal business suit, leaned against the pearl-white BMW sedan, while his wife Margaret, elegant in her designer blouse and tailored pants, examined the leather interior with the entitled scrutiny of someone accustomed to having their preferences catered to immediately. They had grown comfortable with their preferential treatment, basking in Roland Voss's obsequious attention while remaining willfully blind to the discrimination playing out mere feet away. Naomi Park maintained her professional posture near the financing desk, her navy blazer and matching skirt giving her an air of competence that Roland Voss had consistently undermined. Her discomfort with the situation had grown more pronounced with each passing minute, her moral compass warring with her professional obligations and her fear of workplace retaliation. She clutched a stack of financing paperwork, her knuckles white with tension as she watched the scene unfold. From the service area, Derek Owens had found increasingly creative reasons to linger near the showroom entrance. His oil-stained coveralls marked him as working class, someone whose opinion Roland Voss would dismiss as quickly as he had dismissed Ethan Blackwell's inquiries. But Derek's eyes burned with the recognition of injustice, and his jaw clenched tighter with each racist comment that drifted across the showroom floor. Victor Salinas had finally emerged from his office, his dark suit and tie representing the management authority that should have intervened long ago. His leather dress shoes clicked against the polished floor, as he approached the situation with the careful calculation of a man more concerned with avoiding corporate liability than addressing obvious discrimination. His earlier failure to act had allowed the situation to escalate beyond any reasonable boundary of professional conduct. The elderly Harrison couple, both dressed conservatively in muted colors, had positioned themselves near a certified pre-owned vehicle display, but their attention remained fixed on the unfolding drama. Their uncomfortable expressions suggested they recognized the inappropriate nature of Roland Voss's behavior, yet they remained silent witnesses to discrimination that demanded condemnation. Roland Voss cleared his throat with theatrical authority, preparing to deliver what he believed would be his final dismissal of this persistent customer who had disrupted his profitable morning with the Wellington couple. His racist assumptions had calcified into absolute certainty, and his privilege had blinded him to every obvious clue about Ethan Blackwell's true status and purchasing power. "Listen, friend," Roland Voss began, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured dismissively toward the economy vehicle section. "I've been trying to help you understand reality here. People like you need to shop within your means, and these luxury vehicles simply aren't realistic options for someone in your position. Maybe you should consider one of our certified pre-owned economy models over there. Or better yet, check out the used car lot down the street where your budget might stretch a little further." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, their racist implications unmistakable to everyone present. This final insult, delivered with such casual cruelty, represented the culmination of Roland Voss's discriminatory behavior and the breaking point for Ethan Blackwell's remarkable patience. The showroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Ethan Blackwell slowly turned his full attention to Roland Voss, his movements deliberate and controlled. The fluorescent lighting illuminated his face as a small knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth, not bitter or angry, but carrying the quiet confidence of someone about to reveal a truth that would shatter assumptions and destroy careers. "People like me," Ethan Blackwell repeated softly, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent showroom. "You know what, Roland? You're absolutely right. People like me do need to shop within our means, and people like me also believe in doing business with organizations that respect professionalism and basic human dignity." He reached into the back pocket of his blue jeans with deliberate slowness, every movement watched by the growing audience of customers and staff who sensed something momentous approaching. The tension in the showroom was palpable, electric with anticipation, and the collective realization that they were about to witness something extraordinary. From his wallet, Ethan Blackwell withdrew a business card with the careful precision of someone who understood the power of this moment. The card was elegant, embossed on premium cardstock, with gold lettering that caught the overhead lighting. He extended it toward Roland Voss with steady hands, his dark eyes never leaving the salesman's face. "I'm Ethan Blackwell, Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Logistics," he announced clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the showroom. "Perhaps you've heard of us. We're the third largest transportation and logistics company on the East Coast, with annual revenues exceeding $200 million and a fleet of over 3,000 vehicles across 6 states. Roland Voss's face began to drain of color as he stared at the business card, his hands trembling slightly as he read and reread the embossed text that confirmed his worst nightmare. The card's professional design and substantial weight spoke to the legitimacy of a major corporation, not the fantasy of someone trying to sound smart, as he had mockingly suggested. But Ethan Blackwell wasn't finished with his revelation. He reached back into his wallet and produced a distinctive black credit card that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light, its matte finish and minimal text immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with true luxury purchasing power. "This is my American Express Centurion card," Ethan Blackwell continued with quiet authority. "Also known as the Black Card. It requires a 7-figure annual income and has no preset spending limit. The invitation-only membership includes fewer than 100,000 people worldwide." Naomi Park gasped audibly, her professional knowledge of luxury purchases allowing her to immediately understand the significance of what she was witnessing. The Black Card represented a level of wealth and financial credibility that transformed this entire situation from discrimination against a casual browser into the catastrophic loss of a multi-million-dollar client. Derek Owens could barely contain his grin as he watched Roland Voss's racist assumptions crumble in real time. His weathered hands gripped his wrench tighter as satisfaction flooded through him. The vindication he had hoped for, arriving with devastating clarity and undeniable documentation. Victor Salinas felt his stomach drop as the magnitude of Roland Voss's mistake became apparent. His managerial experience allowed him to immediately calculate the financial implications, the corporate liability, and the public relations nightmare that was unfolding under his watch. He began moving toward the confrontation with urgent steps, finally recognizing the crisis that his earlier inaction had created. The Wellington couple exchanged bewildered glances as they began to comprehend what they were witnessing. Thomas loosened his tie unconsciously, while Margaret clutched her designer purse tighter, both suddenly uncomfortable with their complicit enjoyment of preferential treatment that had come at the expense of a customer far more valuable than themselves. But Ethan Blackwell had saved the most devastating revelation for last. From his jacket pocket, he produced a folded document on official bank letterhead, its formal appearance immediately recognizable as serious financial documentation. The paper crinkled softly in the fluorescent-lit silence as he unfolded it with deliberate care. "This is a letter of credit from First National Bank, pre-approving me for a fleet purchase of up to $3 million, Ethan Blackwell announced, extending the document toward Roland Voss's shaking hands. "I came here this morning to purchase 50 luxury vehicles for my executive fleet upgrade. The order includes 20 Mercedes S-Class sedans, 15 BMW 7 Series vehicles, 10 Audi A8 models, and 5 Porsche Cayenne SUVs for our senior management team." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning system and the soft sounds of traffic outside. Roland Voss stared at the banking document with the expression of a man watching his career implode in slow motion. The official letterhead, the detailed specifications, the pre-approved credit limit, everything confirmed the truth he had been too prejudiced to see. Other customers throughout the showroom began pulling out their smartphones, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary that demanded documentation. The soft clicks of camera phones capturing video echoed across the polished floor as social media posts began forming in real time, ready to broadcast this moment of justice to the world. The elderly Harrison couple moved closer, their earlier discomfort transformed into fascination as they watched the power dynamic completely reverse. Their whispered conversations carried clearly in the stunned silence as they processed the magnitude of Roland Voss's discriminatory mistake. Roland Voss finally found his voice, though it emerged as a strangled whisper rather than his earlier confident pronouncements. "I didn't. Mr. Blackwell, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. I was simply trying to—" "You were trying to what, exactly?" Ethan Blackwell interrupted, his tone remaining calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "You were trying to help me understand my place. You were trying to direct someone you assumed couldn't afford luxury vehicles toward economy models based entirely on the color of my skin. You were trying to dismiss a potential multi-million-dollar client because my appearance didn't match your racist preconceptions." Victor Salinas finally reached the group, his face pale with the realization of what his failure to intervene had cost the dealership. His managerial instincts kicked into overdrive as he began calculating damage control strategies, but the documentation in Ethan Blackwell's hands represented financial losses that couldn't be easily explained to corporate headquarters. "Mr. Blackwell," Victor began desperately, "I want to personally apologize for this completely unacceptable situation. Roland's behavior does not represent the values of Prestige Motors, and I assure you that immediate corrective action will be taken. Please allow me to personally handle your fleet purchase and provide you with the professional service you deserve." Ethan Blackwell turned his attention to Victor with the same measured calm he had maintained throughout the ordeal, but his eyes carried the weight of systematic discrimination that extended beyond one salesman's individual prejudices. "Mr. Salinas, I appreciate your concern, but where was this professional service 20 minutes ago when your employee was publicly humiliating me based on racist assumptions? Where was your intervention when Roland was dismissing my inquiries about luxury vehicles?" Where was Prestige Motors' commitment to professional values when I was being directed toward used economy cars because of my appearance? The questions hung in the air like an indictment, each one highlighting the systematic failure that had allowed Roland Voss's discrimination to flourish unchecked. Victor Salinas found himself unable to provide satisfactory answers, his corporate training inadequate for addressing the moral failure that had created this crisis. Roland Voss made another desperate attempt at salvage, his voice growing higher with panic as the financial implications of his behavior became clear. "Mr. Blackwell, please understand, I was just being cautious about matching customers with appropriate vehicles. I never intended any disrespect, and I'd be honored to help you find exactly what you're looking for in our luxury inventory." Ethan Blackwell's response carried the quiet finality of a business decision made with careful consideration and absolute certainty. "Roland, the time for your assistance has passed. You had every opportunity to provide professional service, and instead, you chose to judge me based on stereotypes and racial assumptions. Your apologies now are motivated by financial panic, not genuine remorse or professional growth." He began returning his documentation to his wallet, with the same deliberate care he had used to present it, each movement watched by the growing audience of customers and staff who recognized they were witnessing the conclusion of a devastating business mistake. "I am no longer interested in doing business with Prestige Motors," Ethan Blackwell announced clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the showroom. "I cannot trust my company's significant investment to an organization that allows such blatant discrimination to occur without intervention. My fleet purchase will be completed elsewhere, with a dealership that demonstrates genuine professionalism and respect for all customers." The financial impact of his words hit the room like a physical blow. The Wellington couple realized they had witnessed Roland Voss walk away from a commission that would have exceeded their annual salaries. Naomi Park calculated the lost revenue with professional precision, understanding that $2.7 million in luxury vehicle sales represented more than most salespeople generated in their entire careers. Derek Owens could barely contain his satisfaction as he watched Roland Voss grasp the magnitude of his mistake. The mechanic had witnessed enough discrimination to appreciate the sweet justice of watching prejudice destroy itself through willful blindness to obvious truth. Customers throughout the showroom continued recording, their smartphones capturing not just the immediate confrontation, but the broader lesson about the devastating consequences of racial discrimination in business environments. Social media posts were already forming, ready to broadcast this moment of accountability to audiences far beyond the Prestige Motors showroom. Roland Voss made one final, desperate plea, his professional composure completely shattered as the reality of his situation crystallized. "Please, Mr. Blackwell, give me another chance. I made a mistake, but I can provide you with exceptional service. The commission on your fleet purchase could set both of us up for success." The naked greed in his final appeal only emphasized how completely he misunderstood the situation. Ethan Blackwell regarded him with a mixture of pity and disappointment, recognizing that Roland Voss remained focused on financial consequences rather than the moral failure that had created this crisis. "Roland, your mistake wasn't a simple error in judgment," Ethan Blackwell replied with quiet dignity. "Your mistake was allowing racial prejudice to override basic professional behavior. Your mistake was assuming that someone's appearance determines their worth, their purchasing power, or their right to respectful treatment. Your mistake was choosing discrimination over service, stereotypes over professionalism." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle across the silent showroom before delivering his final verdict on the situation. "Those aren't mistakes that can be corrected with second chances or exceptional service. Those are character flaws that make you unsuitable for any business interaction with my company. The consequences you're facing now are the direct result of choices you made repeatedly over the past 30 minutes, despite numerous opportunities to demonstrate basic human decency." The power dynamic had completed its reversal, transforming Roland Voss from a confident salesman controlling the interaction into a desperate man watching his career crumble through his own prejudiced actions. The fluorescent lights that had illuminated his earlier confident dismissals now revealed his panic, his desperation, and his complete inability to undo the damage his racism had created. Victor Salinas stood frozen in the wreckage of what should have been the most profitable sale in the dealership's recent history. Knowing that his explanation to ownership would require acknowledging systematic failures that extended far beyond Roland Voss's individual behavior, the corporate liability, the public relations disaster, and the financial losses would demand accountability at every level of management. As Ethan Blackwell prepared to leave, his dignity intact and his point definitively made, the showroom remained gripped by the aftermath of his revelation. The customers who had witnessed the discrimination now understood they had seen something historically significant, a moment where prejudice met its consequences with devastating clarity. The fluorescent lights continued their steady illumination of Prestige Motors' showroom, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The luxury vehicles remained as gleaming and expensive as before, but the institution's credibility lay in ruins, destroyed by one employee's racist assumptions and management's failure to intervene. Roland Voss stood among the wreckage of his career, finally understanding that his prejudices had cost him the largest commission of his professional life. But more importantly, they had exposed him as unfit for any role requiring human decency and professional judgment. The revelation was complete, the justice was served, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The silence in the showroom stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the distant sound of traffic from the street. Victor Salinas stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds before his survival instincts kicked in, his mind racing through the catastrophic implications of what had just unfolded before his eyes. "Mr. Blackwell," Victor began, his voice carefully controlled as he stepped forward, his polished dress shoes clicking against the marble floor. "I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this unacceptable treatment. This is absolutely not representative of Prestige Motors' values or standards." But even as the words left his mouth, Victor knew they rang hollow. The damage was done, witnessed by a showroom full of customers who were now looking at everyone with newfound suspicion. Roland Voss remained motionless beside the gleaming Mercedes display, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror as the magnitude of his mistake became clear. Ethan Blackwell regarded Victor with the same calm composure he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. His green t-shirt and blue jeans, a stark contrast to the panic radiating from the dealership's management. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of disappointment rather than anger. "Mr. Salinas, I appreciate your apology, but this isn't simply about one employee's behavior. This is about a culture that allowed such treatment to continue unchecked. How many other customers have walked out of here after facing similar discrimination? How many potential business relationships has this dealership destroyed through prejudice and assumptions?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, and Victor felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He glanced around the showroom, noting how other customers were pulling out their phones, some already recording, others typing furiously on social media platforms. Naomi Park had been standing near the BMW display, watching the entire scene unfold with a mixture of vindication and professional concern. She stepped forward, now her navy blazer and matching skirt giving her an air of professional authority as she approached Ethan Blackwell. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice sincere and direct, "I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced here today. I should have intervened earlier, and I deeply regret that I didn't have the courage to stand up against what I knew was wrong." Ethan turned to face her, and for the first time since entering the dealership, his expression softened slightly. "Ms. Park, I watched you throughout this entire encounter. I could see your discomfort with the situation. I don't hold you responsible for another person's prejudice. But I could have done more," Naomi insisted, her professional composure cracking slightly. "I've been with this dealership for 3 years, and I've seen patterns of behavior that made me uncomfortable. I reported concerns before, but nothing changed. I should have been more persistent." The admission sent a chill through Victor Salinas. If Naomi had filed previous complaints about discriminatory behavior, that created a paper trail of knowledge and inaction that could destroy them in any potential lawsuit. Meanwhile, News of the confrontation was spreading through the dealership like wildfire. Derek Owens had witnessed the entire revelation from the service area, and he wasted no time sharing the news with his colleagues. The young mechanic's voice carried across the service bays as he recounted the story to the other technicians. You should have seen Roland's face when he realized who he was talking to. Derek called out to his coworkers, his oil-stained coveralls, a badge of honest work in contrast to the sales floor drama. $2.7 million fleet purchase, and he walked away from it because he couldn't see past the color of the man's skin. The service team gathered around Derek, their voices rising in disbelief and anger. Several of them had their own stories about Roland Voss's behavior, incidents they'd witnessed but never felt empowered to report. Now, with the salesman's prejudice exposed so dramatically, they began sharing their observations freely. I saw him do the same thing to that young Hispanic couple last month, called out Maria Santos from the parts department. They had cash in hand for a certified pre-owned vehicle, but he kept steering them toward the older, higher mileage cars. Remember that black family that came in looking at the Escalades? Added James Torres, another technician. Roland told them those vehicles required special financing and tried to send them to that sketchy lot down the street. As these stories emerged, Victor felt the foundation of his damage control efforts crumbling beneath his feet. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of discrimination that had been festering under his management. Back on the showroom floor, Thomas and Margaret Wellington were experiencing their own moment of reckoning. The wealthy white couple had basked in Roland Voss's preferential treatment, enjoying the validation of being seen as obviously sophisticated and financially capable. Now, watching Ethan Blackwell's dignified response to blatant discrimination, they felt the uncomfortable sting of complicity. Margaret leaned close to her husband, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. Thomas, we need to postpone our purchase. I can't be associated with this kind of establishment. Thomas nodded grimly, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume that marked him as part of a system he'd never bothered to examine. They began moving quietly toward the exit, hoping to escape before anyone noticed their departure. But Ethan Blackwell had noticed. His business acumen included a keen awareness of social dynamics, and he watched the Wellington couple's retreat with interest rather than satisfaction. Their discomfort was a natural consequence of witnessing injustice, but their privileged position had allowed them to benefit from that same system without question. Mr. and Mrs. Wellington, Ethan called out, his voice carrying clearly across the showroom. The couple froze, turning back with expressions of embarrassed resignation. I don't blame you for the treatment I received here today, Ethan continued, his tone measured and thoughtful. But I hope you'll consider how your silence in moments like these contributes to the perpetuation of discrimination. Your voices carry weight in spaces like this. Use them. Margaret Wellington's face flushed with shame and recognition. You're absolutely right, Mr. Blackwell. We should have spoken up immediately. We'll be reviewing our business relationships with organizations that don't share our values. The couple's public acknowledgement of their failure to act sent another ripple of tension through the remaining customers. Several other patrons began questioning their own comfort with the dealership's practices, and Victor could see potential sales evaporating by the minute. Just as Victor was calculating the expanding scope of the crisis, the showroom doors opened to admit Sandra Mitchell. Ethan's executive assistant entered like a force of nature, her sharp charcoal business suit and confident stride commanding immediate attention. Her natural hair was styled in a professional updo, and she carried a leather portfolio that spoke of serious business dealings. Mr. Blackwell, Sandra announced, her voice crisp and efficient as she approached. I have the fleet specifications and delivery timeline requirements from the logistics team. Are we ready to proceed with the purchase authorization? Her arrival served as a powerful visual reinforcement of Ethan's legitimate business status. Here was another successful black professional, clearly comfortable in corporate environments, treating Ethan with the respect and deference due to a CEO. Sandra's sharp eyes took in the tense atmosphere of the showroom, noting the shocked expression on Roland Voss's face, the nervous energy radiating from Victor Salinas, and the general air of crisis management in progress. I trust there haven't been any complications with the transaction? Sandra asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected otherwise. There have been some cultural challenges, Ethan replied diplomatically. I'm reconsidering whether Prestige Motors aligns with Sterling Logistics values and professional standards. Sandra's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. As a black woman who had climbed the corporate ladder through skill and determination, she had no patience for discrimination in any form. I see, she said, her voice cooling noticeably as she regarded the dealership staff. Perhaps we should consider alternative vendors who can provide both quality vehicles and quality service. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Sandra's professional demeanor made it clear that Sterling Logistics had options, and those options included taking their substantial business elsewhere. Victor Salinas felt panic rising in his chest. The loss of a $2.7 million fleet purchase would be devastating enough, but the broader implications were even worse. If word spread through the business community that Prestige Motors had discriminated against a successful black CEO, other corporate clients might reconsider their relationships with the dealership. Please, Victor interjected, desperation creeping into his voice despite his efforts to remain professional. Give us an opportunity to make this right. Roland's behavior was completely unacceptable, and there will be immediate consequences. Roland Voss finally seemed to emerge from his shocked stupor, his survival instincts belatedly kicking in as he realized his career was hanging by a thread. Mr. Blackwell, I made a terrible mistake, Roland began, his voice shaking with panic. I misjudged the situation completely. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. Please don't let my error reflect on the entire dealership. But Ethan shook his head slowly, his expression remaining disappointingly calm. Mr. Voss, your apology might carry more weight if it came from genuine remorse rather than fear of consequences. Throughout our entire interaction, you had multiple opportunities to reassess your assumptions and adjust your behavior. Instead, you doubled down on prejudice and disrespect. You're right, Roland admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I have no excuse for my behavior. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I treated you terribly. Sandra Mitchell watched this exchange with professional detachment, taking notes in her portfolio. As an executive assistant to a CEO, she understood that her observations might be crucial if this situation escalated to legal action. Other customers in the showroom were beginning to document the scene as well. Phones emerged from pockets and purses as people recorded the aftermath of the confrontation. Social media posts were already going live, sharing real-time updates about the discrimination incident at Prestige Motors. Victor realized that damage control had evolved into damage limitation. The story was already spreading beyond the confines of the dealership, and their reputation was being shaped by witnesses who had seen Roland Voss's behavior firsthand. Mr. Blackwell, Victor said, pulling out his own phone. I need to document this incident thoroughly for my report to the dealership owner, Richard Caldwell. Your experience here today represents a failure of leadership at multiple levels, and there need to be systematic changes to prevent this from happening again. Ethan observed Victor's transition from panic to professional responsibility with interest. Mr. Salinas, I appreciate your recognition that this is a systemic issue rather than an isolated incident. However, my confidence in this dealership's ability to change has been severely damaged. Derek Owens had emerged from the service area and was standing near the edge of the sales floor, listening to the conversation with intense interest. As someone who had witnessed Roland Voss's discriminatory behavior from the sidelines, he felt a sense of vindication, seeing the salesman finally held accountable. Mr. Blackwell, Derek called out, his voice carrying the honest directness of someone who worked with his hands for a living. I want you to know that not everyone here agreed with how you were treated. Some of us tried to speak up in the past, but we didn't have the authority to make changes. Ethan turned to acknowledge Derek, recognizing the young mechanic who had shown signs of discomfort during Roland's discriminatory behavior. I appreciate that, Derek, Ethan replied, having overheard the name during earlier conversations. Change often requires people at all levels of an organization to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Sandra Mitchell looked up from her note-taking, her attention caught by Derek's intervention. Are you saying there have been previous incidents of discriminatory behavior that weren't addressed by management? Derek nodded firmly. Ma'am, I've been here 2 years, and I've seen patterns. Customers of color getting steered toward used cars when they asked about new ones. Assumptions about financing capability based on appearance. Comments about certain neighborhoods when people mentioned their addresses. Victor felt his heart sinking as Derek's testimony painted a picture of institutional discrimination. These weren't isolated incidents or misunderstandings. They were evidence of a culture that had allowed prejudice to flourish unchecked. Naomi Park stepped forward again, her professional integrity overcoming her job security concerns. Derek's right. I've tried to compensate by offering assistance when I could, but the pattern of behavior was concerning. When I brought it to management's attention, I was told that salespeople have different styles and approaches. The admission hung in the air like an indictment. Victor realized that his own failure to take previous complaints seriously had contributed to the current crisis. His attempts to maintain team harmony had enabled discrimination to continue. Sandra made additional notes in her portfolio, her expression growing more serious as the scope of the problem became clear. As a corporate executive, she understood the legal implications of documented patterns of discriminatory behavior. Mr. Salinas, Sandra said, her voice taking on the formal tone she used for serious business discussions. It sounds like Sterling Logistics would be entering into a business relationship with an organization that has systemic issues with discrimination. That presents significant reputational risks for our company. The statement hit Victor like a physical blow. Corporate clients were increasingly concerned about the social responsibility and ethical practices of their vendors. A discrimination scandal could make Prestige Motors radioactive to other business accounts. Roland Voss seemed to finally grasp the broader implications of his behavior. His prejudiced treatment of one customer had exposed a pattern of discrimination that threatened the entire dealership's future. I understand if you can't forgive me, Roland said to Ethan, his voice heavy with defeated resignation. But please don't let my mistakes destroy other people's livelihoods. There are good people working here who don't deserve to suffer for my prejudice. Ethan considered Roland's words carefully, recognizing the genuine remorse that had finally replaced panic and self-preservation. Mr. Voss, accountability isn't about punishment. It's about ensuring that harmful behavior stops and doesn't happen again. The consequences you're facing are the natural result of choices you made repeatedly over time. Sandra closed her portfolio with a decisive snap, signaling that she had gathered enough information for her assessment. Mr. Blackwell, I believe we have sufficient documentation to make an informed decision about how to proceed. Victor Salinas realized that his last chance to salvage the situation was slipping away. The damage to the dealership's reputation was already spreading through social media and would soon reach the broader business community. His only hope was to demonstrate that Prestige Motors was capable of meaningful change. Mr. Blackwell, Ms. Mitchell, Victor said, his voice carrying the weight of desperate sincerity. I know we've lost your trust today, and we may not be able to earn it back. But if you're willing to give us the opportunity, I want to use this incident as a catalyst for real change. Not just policy changes, but cultural transformation that ensures no customer ever faces discrimination here again. Ethan looked around the showroom one final time, taking in the faces of the staff and customers who had witnessed this confrontation. Some showed embarrassment, others displayed newfound awareness, and a few reflected genuine commitment to doing better. The fluorescent lights continued to hum overhead, casting their bright, unforgiving illumination on a scene that had fundamentally changed everyone present. The momentum of justice was building, and there would be no returning to the comfortable ignorance that had allowed discrimination to flourish in this space. The fluorescent lights overhead cast their unforgiving brightness across the Prestige Motors showroom. As the automatic glass doors swept open with a decisive whoosh, Richard Caldwell strode through the entrance, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished marble floor with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. His charcoal gray Armani suit was perfectly tailored, his silver tie gleaming under the lights, and his diamond-studded Rolex caught the reflection of the luxury vehicles surrounding him. At 55, Richard had built his automotive empire through calculated charm and ruthless business acumen. But the emergency call from Victor Salinas had shattered his peaceful Saturday morning. Victor rushed toward his boss, his face pale and drawn with stress. The general manager's dark suit was slightly wrinkled now, his tie loosened from the tension of the past hour. "Richard, thank God you're here. The situation has escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated." Richard's steely gray eyes swept across the showroom, taking in the unusual scene. Customers clustered in small groups, their phones out, whispers carrying across the normally pristine sales floor. His gaze landed on Ethan Blackwell, still standing near the luxury sedan section in his green t-shirt and blue jeans. But now the entire atmosphere had shifted. Where before Ethan had seemed like an unwelcome intruder to Roland's prejudiced eyes, he now commanded the space with quiet authority. Sandra Mitchell stood beside him, her professional presence in a sharp navy business suit and white blouse making it impossible to dismiss the legitimacy of Sterling Logistics. "Mr. Caldwell," Victor continued in a hushed tone, "we're looking at a potential loss of $2.7 million in fleet sales. Plus the reputational damage could be catastrophic." Richard straightened his shoulders and approached Ethan with the practiced smile that had closed countless deals. His hand extended in greeting, his voice carrying the smooth warmth of expensive whiskey. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm Richard Caldwell, owner of Prestige Motors. I cannot begin to express how mortified I am by what transpired here today. Please accept my most sincere apologies for the completely unacceptable treatment you received." Ethan regarded the outstretched hand for a moment before accepting the handshake, his grip firm, but his expression measured. "Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate you coming down personally. However, I need you to understand that this isn't simply about one employee's behavior." Roland stood frozen near the Bentley display, his face ashen, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. His white dress shirt was now damp with perspiration, his navy slacks somehow seeming less crisp, as if his entire persona had deflated with his exposed prejudice. The confident salesman who had dismissed a multi-millionaire CEO was now a man watching his career crumble in real time. Of course, Richard nodded eagerly, his politician's smile never wavering. "Roland's behavior was completely contrary to our values. I can assure you this was an isolated incident, and we'll be taking immediate action to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Ethan's brown eyes remained steady, his voice calm, but carrying an edge of steel. "Mr. Caldwell, with respect, this wasn't an isolated incident. This was the product of a culture that allowed such discrimination to flourish unchecked. Your employee felt comfortable expressing these views publicly, in front of multiple witnesses, which tells me this behavior has been tolerated, if not encouraged." Sandra Mitchell stepped closer to Ethan, her tablet in hand, her professional demeanor radiating competence. "Mr. Caldwell, Sterling Logistics values diversity and inclusion as core business principles. What we witnessed today raises serious questions about whether Prestige Motors shares those values." The weight of Ethan's words seemed to settle over the showroom like morning fog. Several staff members had gathered at a respectful distance, and Richard could sense the shift in atmosphere. This wasn't just about appeasing an angry customer anymore. This was about fundamental questions of character and culture. Naomi Park, who had been standing quietly near the BMW display, suddenly stepped forward. Her professional blazer and skirt gave her an air of authority as she cleared her throat. "Mr. Caldwell, if I may, I think there's something you need to know." Richard turned toward his sales associate, noting the determined set of her jaw. "Yes, Naomi? This isn't the first time Roland has treated minority customers differently," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've witnessed multiple incidents over the past 2 years where he's made assumptions about customers based on their appearance or ethnicity." Roland's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "Naomi, that's not true. I treat all customers professionally." "No, Roland, you don't," Naomi continued, her voice carrying across the showroom. 3 months ago, you told that young Hispanic couple that they should look at certified pre-owned vehicles before they even mentioned their budget. Last Christmas, you made that comment about the Asian businessman's accent. I filed complaints with Victor twice, but nothing changed." Victor's face flushed red, as all eyes turned to him. The general manager loosened his tie further, his voice defensive. "Naomi, those complaints were investigated. There wasn't sufficient evidence to take disciplinary action because you didn't want to see the evidence." Derek Owens called out from the service area entrance. The young mechanic had abandoned his usual oil-stained coveralls for a clean work shirt and jeans. His hands wiped clean as he approached the group. His youthful face was set with determination as he continued. "I've been working here for 3 years, and I've watched Roland from the service bay windows. He profiles customers constantly." Derek's voice grew more confident as he found his footing. "Last month, he spent 20 minutes showing a white college kid every sports car on the floor. But when that black doctor came in asking about the same models, Roland told him they were all sold. I checked the inventory myself. We had 5 of those cars available." Richard felt the foundation of his defense crumbling beneath his feet. The practiced smile was becoming harder to maintain as he realized the scope of the problem. "Derek, these are serious allegations." "They're not allegations, Mr. Caldwell," Derek replied firmly. "They're observations from someone who's been watching this happen for years. And it's not just Roland. The culture here has made it clear that certain customers matter more than others." Margaret Wellington, who had been quietly observing from near the Porsche display with her husband Thomas, suddenly spoke up, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. She looked deeply uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but I feel compelled to say something. Earlier today, we witnessed firsthand how differently we were treated compared to Mr. Blackwell. The contrast was stark." Thomas Wellington nodded reluctantly, his expensive suit unable to hide his discomfort. "We were considering purchasing 2 vehicles today, but after witnessing this behavior, we're not sure Prestige Motors reflects the values we want to support." The automatic doors swept open again, and Christine Flores entered the showroom with the purposeful stride of someone following a breaking story. The local news reporter was dressed in a professional burgundy blazer and black slacks, her press credentials visible, a small camera crew following behind her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her sharp eyes immediately assessing the tension in the room. "Excuse me," Christine announced, her voice carrying the authority of the Fourth Estate. "I'm Christine Flores with Channel 7 News. We received multiple tips about a discrimination incident at this dealership. Could someone provide a statement?" Richard's face went pale as he realized the situation had escalated far beyond internal damage control. The presence of media transformed this from a customer service issue into a potential public relations catastrophe. "Miss Flores, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. We're handling this matter internally." "Actually," Ethan interjected calmly, "there's no misunderstanding. I'm Ethan Blackwell, CEO of Sterling Logistics, and I was refused service at this dealership based purely on racial discrimination. The incident was witnessed by multiple customers and employees." Christine's eyes lit up with the recognition of a significant story. She signaled to her cameraman as she approached Ethan. "Mr. Blackwell, would you be willing to go on record about what happened here today? I believe transparency serves everyone's interests." Ethan replied, his voice steady and professional. "What happened here today wasn't just about me. It's about a pattern of discriminatory behavior that affects how this business treats customers based on their race and appearance." Roland finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate croak. "Mr. Caldwell, please, I've worked here for 8 years. I made a mistake, but I'm not a racist. I was just having a bad day, and I misread the situation." "Roland," Victor said quietly, his voice heavy with finality, "we need to talk privately, now." But Ethan shook his head, his brown eyes never leaving Richard's face. "Mr. Caldwell, terminating Roland won't restore my confidence in this dealership. The fact that multiple employees are now coming forward with similar stories tells me this is a systemic issue, not just one bad actor." Richard felt the weight of decades of business acumen, telling him that his next words would determine whether Prestige Motors survived this crisis with its reputation intact. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher now, exposing every flaw in his carefully constructed corporate image. "Mr. Blackwell," Richard began, his voice losing some of its practiced smoothness. "What can we do to make this right? Sterling Logistics business is important to us, and I want to ensure we meet your standards for professionalism and respect." "It's not about sterling logistics anymore, Mr. Caldwell," Ethan replied, his calm dignity making his words carry even more weight. "It's about every customer who walks through those doors. How many other qualified buyers have you lost because your staff made assumptions? How many people have been humiliated and dismissed because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of what a luxury car buyer should look like?" Sandra Mitchell stepped forward, her tablet displaying social media feeds that were already beginning to buzz with activity. "Mr. Caldwell, customers in the showroom have been posting about this incident for the past hour. The story is already gaining traction online." Christine Flores nodded, her professional instincts engaged. "We've received videos from multiple witnesses. This story is going to run tonight, and I suspect it will have national pickup by tomorrow morning." The reality of the situation crashed over Richard like a cold wave. This wasn't just about losing one sale, no matter how large. This was about the fundamental character of his business being called into question on a public stage. The showroom that had always been his pride now felt like a courtroom where he was being judged and found wanting. "Roland," Richard said finally, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable consequence, "you're terminated, effective immediately. Turn in your keys and access cards to Victor." Roland's face crumpled as the words hit him. 8 years of employment, thousands in monthly commissions, the respect of his peers, all evaporating in an instant. "Mr. Caldwell, please, I have a mortgage, children. One mistake shouldn't cost me everything." "It wasn't one mistake, Roland," Naomi said quietly. "It was a pattern of behavior that finally caught up with you." But even as Roland gathered his belongings with shaking hands, Ethan's expression remained unchanged. The firing was justice, but it wasn't resolution. The damage to trust ran deeper than any single termination could repair. Derek Owens watched as Roland walked toward the exit, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The mechanic felt no satisfaction in seeing another man's downfall, but he felt a deep sense of validation that the truth had finally come to light. As Roland pushed through the glass doors for the last time as a Prestige Motors employee, the showroom fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the quiet clicking of Christine Flores' cameraman documenting the aftermath. Richard Caldwell looked around at his dealership, seeing it through new eyes. The luxury vehicles that had always represented success now seemed like monuments to a culture that had valued the wrong things. The pristine showroom that had been his pride was now the scene of his greatest professional failure. "Mr. Blackwell," Richard said quietly, "I understand if you can't do business with us today, but I hope you'll consider giving us an opportunity to prove that we can change, that we can be better." Ethan looked around the showroom, taking in the faces of the employees who had found their voices, the customers who had witnessed both the worst and the potential for something better, and the media representative who would carry this story to a broader audience. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Mr. Caldwell," Ethan replied. "And it doesn't happen just because you got caught. Real change requires examining every policy, every practice, every assumption that allowed this culture to develop in the first place." The fluorescent lights continued their steady illumination as the consequences of years of unchecked discrimination began to unfold, promising that this Saturday morning would mark not just an ending, but a reckoning that would reshape everything Prestige Motors claimed to represent. 3 months had passed since that fateful day at Prestige Motors, and the autumn sunlight streaming through the dealership's large windows seemed brighter somehow. The same overhead fluorescent lights illuminated the showroom floor, but everything else had changed. Where once an atmosphere of elitism and discrimination had poisoned the air, a new energy of inclusivity and professionalism now thrived. Ethan Blackwell stepped through the glass doors, wearing a crisp navy business suit and polished leather shoes, his presence commanding the same quiet confidence it always had. But this time, instead of dismissive glances and racist assumptions, he was greeted with genuine respect and recognition. The transformation was immediately apparent in the staff's attentive postures and welcoming expressions. Victor Salinas emerged from what was now his executive office, having been promoted to general manager after Richard Caldwell's hasty resignation amid the discrimination scandal. Dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a burgundy tie, Victor approached with an extended hand and a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Mr. Blackwell, welcome back to Prestige Motors," Victor said warmly, his handshake firm and respectful. "I want to personally thank you again for giving us the opportunity to earn back your trust. The changes we've implemented have transformed not just our policies, but our entire culture." Behind Victor, Naomi Park approached wearing a professional black blazer over a white blouse and matching black slacks. Her confident stride and bright smile reflected her recent promotion to lead sales manager, a position she had earned through her integrity and the courage she had shown during the discrimination incident. The small gold nameplate on her lapel read, "Lead Sales Manager," with pride. "Mr. Blackwell," Naomi said, extending her hand with genuine enthusiasm. "I've been looking forward to this day for months. We have everything prepared for your fleet purchase, and I'm honored to be the one facilitating this transaction." Derek Owens appeared from the direction of the service area, no longer wearing oil-stained coveralls, but dressed in a neat white dress shirt and dark blue slacks, as befitted his new role as a sales trainee. His enthusiastic grin hadn't changed, and his eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed justice prevail and was now part of the solution. "Mr. Blackwell," Derek called out, his voice carrying the same genuine respect it had shown that day 3 months ago. "I can't tell you how much it means to see you back here. This place has become everything it should have been from the beginning." As they walked through the showroom, Ethan noticed the subtle but significant changes throughout the space. Near the customer service area, prominently displayed certificates showed the dealership's recent diversity training completion and their new partnership with local civil rights organizations. A scholarship fund plaque announced their commitment to supporting minority students in business and automotive programs. "These changes," Victor explained, following Ethan's gaze, "they're not just for show. Every employee has completed comprehensive sensitivity and inclusion training. We've restructured our entire approach to customer service, ensuring that every person who walks through these doors receives the same level of respect and attention, regardless of their appearance or assumed financial status." Naomi guided them toward a comfortable seating area where refreshments waited. As they walked, she pointed out another significant change. Behind the reception desk stood Maria Santos, a confident Latina woman in her 30s, wearing a professional red blazer over a black top and matching black slacks. She was enthusiastically showing a young black couple various vehicle options, her bilingual skills evident as she seamlessly switched between English and Spanish while explaining features. "Maria joined our team last month," Naomi explained. "She brings 15 years of experience and has already become one of our top performers. She's exactly the kind of professional we want representing Prestige Motors moving forward." The sight of Maria treating the young couple with the same enthusiasm and respect that should have been universal from the beginning filled Ethan with satisfaction. This was the change he had hoped his experience might catalyze. Not just policy adjustments on paper, but genuine cultural transformation in practice. Victor pulled out a leather portfolio and opened it on the table. "Mr. Blackwell, before we proceed with the business details, I want to show you something that demonstrates our commitment goes beyond words." The portfolio contained documentation of the dealership's donations to 3 civil rights organizations, totaling over $50,000. Letters of appreciation from community leaders praised Prestige Motors for taking responsibility and implementing meaningful change. Local business association newsletters featured the dealership as a model for how companies should address discrimination and rebuild trust. "Your experience here exposed problems that had been allowed to fester for too long," Victor continued, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "Richard Caldwell's resignation was just the beginning. We've rebuilt our hiring practices, our training programs, and our management structure to ensure nothing like what happened to you can happen again." Derek, still beaming with pride at being part of the new team, added his perspective. "Mr. Blackwell, I've been here for 3 years, and I can tell you that the difference is like night and day. Before, there was this underlying tension, this sense that some customers mattered more than others. Now everyone who comes in here gets treated like they could be our biggest sale, because we've learned that you never know who someone really is." The wisdom in Derek's simple statement resonated deeply. It captured the fundamental lesson that Roland Voss's ignorance and prejudice had cost him so dearly. a lesson that had now been internalized throughout the organization. Naomi spread out the paperwork for the fleet purchase across the table. Your order for 50 luxury vehicles represents our largest single transaction this year, Mr. Blackwell. The commission from this sale will help me establish the financial security I've been working toward for years. I can't express how grateful I am that you chose to give us this opportunity despite what happened. As Ethan reviewed the documentation, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The 50 vehicles, a mix of executive sedans and luxury SUVs for Sterling Logistics' expanding operations, represented more than just a business transaction. They symbolized the power of dignity in the face of discrimination and the possibility of turning painful experiences into positive change. Sandra Mitchell arrived precisely on schedule, her professional presence unchanged from 3 months earlier, wearing a sharp charcoal business suit and carrying her signature leather briefcase. She brought the final contracts and financing documentation needed to complete the purchase. Mr. Blackwell, Sandra said efficiently while setting up her materials. I've coordinated the delivery schedule with your department heads. The first 20 vehicles will be delivered next week, with the remainder arriving over the following month to minimize disruption to operations. Victor watched the professional interaction with obvious respect and perhaps a touch of embarrassment, as he considered how differently this scene might have unfolded under the old management culture. Sandra's competence and authority were undeniable, yet 3 months ago, she likely would have faced the same discriminatory assumptions that had been directed at Ethan. As they worked through the paperwork, Derek shared an observation that highlighted the transformation's impact. Mr. Blackwell, we've had so many customers comment on the change in atmosphere here. People notice when they're treated with genuine respect, rather than being sized up and categorized the moment they walk in. The business details proceeded smoothly, a stark contrast to the hostility and obstacles that had characterized Ethan's first visit. Naomi's professionalism and expertise shone as she coordinated the complex logistics of the fleet purchase, her commission from the sale representing a life-changing financial opportunity that she had earned through her integrity and courage. Outside the showroom windows, a news van pulled into the parking lot. Christine Flores emerged wearing a burgundy blazer over a black top and dark slacks, her professional appearance unchanged from her initial coverage of the discrimination incident. However, today's story would be dramatically different. The local news is here for our follow-up interview, Victor explained to Ethan. We volunteered to be part of a series on how businesses can successfully address discrimination and rebuild community trust. Your willingness to give us a second chance has become a powerful example of how positive change is possible when companies take real responsibility. As the contracts were signed and the massive transaction finalized, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The same showroom where Ethan had been dismissed, humiliated, and discriminated against was now celebrating his business and recognizing the value he brought as a customer and community member. Derek, still somewhat amazed by his journey from mechanic to sales trainee, offered his perspective on the broader changes. Mr. Blackwell, watching what happened to you that day and seeing how you handled it with such dignity, that taught me something important about standing up for what's right. It changed how I see my role here and in my community. The ripple effects of that confrontation 3 months ago continued to spread in positive directions. Other businesses in the area had reached out to learn about Prestige Motors' transformation process. The dealership had become an unexpected leader in diversity and inclusion practices within the automotive industry. As the final paperwork was completed and copies distributed, Naomi handed Ethan the keys to his personal vehicle, a luxury sedan that would serve as his company car. The weight of the keys felt significant, representing not just transportation, but triumph over discrimination and the power of perseverance in the face of injustice. Mr. Blackwell, Victor said as they prepared to conclude the transaction, I want you to know that your experience here has been shared with your permission in our training programs. Your dignity in the face of discrimination and your willingness to give us a chance to do better has inspired changes that extend far beyond these walls. Christine Flores approached with her camera operator, ready to document this positive conclusion to a story that had initially highlighted the ugly reality of discrimination in business settings. The contrast between her first news report, which had exposed the dealership's discriminatory practices, and today's follow-up story celebrating transformation and redemption, illustrated the potential for meaningful change when organizations take responsibility for their failures. "Mr. Blackwell," Christine said warmly, "would you be willing to share a few words about what this transformation means to you and what message you'd want other business owners to take from this experience?" Ethan considered her question carefully, understanding that his words would carry weight beyond this particular situation. "What I experienced here 3 months ago was painful and demoralizing, but it also presented an opportunity. When businesses face their discriminatory practices honestly and make genuine changes, they don't just prevent future discrimination, they create environments where everyone can thrive." He paused, looking around the showroom at the diverse staff working professionally with customers of all backgrounds. "The real victory isn't just that I'm being treated with respect now. It's that every person who walks through these doors will have a different experience than I initially had. That's how individual moments of discrimination can become catalysts for broader change." As the interview concluded and the news crew prepared their equipment for departure, the afternoon energy in the showroom reflected the positive transformation that had taken place. Customers browsed vehicles while receiving attentive service, regardless of their appearance or assumed financial status. Staff members worked collaboratively, their interactions free from the toxic dynamics that had previously poisoned the workplace culture. Derek approached Ethan one final time before his departure. "Mr. Blackwell, I just want you to know that watching your courage that day inspired me to speak up when I see discrimination anywhere, not just here at work. You turned a terrible experience into something that's made a lot of people better." The young man's words captured the broader impact of choosing dignity over retaliation, persistence over bitterness. Ethan's response to discrimination had created ripples of positive change that extended far beyond the immediate situation. As Ethan prepared to drive away in his new vehicle, he noticed Maria Santos enthusiastically showing an elderly black gentleman the features of a luxury SUV, while her colleague assisted a young Hispanic family with financing options. The scene represented everything the dealership should have been from the beginning, and now finally was. Sandra packed up her materials with characteristic efficiency, but before leaving, she offered her own observation. "Mr. Blackwell, in my years of handling business transactions, I've seen how discrimination costs companies millions in lost opportunities. What happened here proves that doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's good business." Victor walked Ethan to his new vehicle, their conversation reflecting the mutual respect that had replaced the initial crisis. "Mr. Blackwell, I hope you'll consider us for any future automotive needs. More importantly, I hope the changes we've made here will inspire other businesses to examine their own practices and make necessary improvements." As Ethan settled into the driver's seat of his new luxury sedan, the contrast with his first visit couldn't have been more dramatic. Where he had once been dismissed and humiliated, he was now celebrated and respected. The transformation represented more than just policy changes. It reflected a fundamental shift in values and practices that would benefit countless future customers. Starting the engine, Ethan reflected on the journey from discrimination to transformation. His decision to return and complete the purchase hadn't just been about business. It had been about demonstrating that change was possible when organizations committed to genuine improvement rather than superficial adjustments. As he drove away from Prestige Motors, the afternoon sun illuminated a dealership that had been reborn through confronting its failures and committing to better practices. The building looked the same from the outside, but everything that mattered had been transformed through the courage to acknowledge problems and the commitment to implement solutions. 3 months later, Christine Flores's follow-up story would air that evening, highlighting Prestige Motors as a model for how businesses could address discrimination and rebuild community trust. The story would inspire other companies to examine their own practices and make necessary changes, extending the positive impact of Ethan's experience far beyond one dealership. The final image was of customers of all backgrounds receiving respectful, professional service in a showroom where discrimination had been replaced by inclusion, where assumptions had given way to respect, and where one man's dignity in the face of injustice had catalyzed transformation that would benefit generations of future customers. You just witnessed resilience that refused to break. If this story deserves to be remembered, help us make sure it is. Subscribe, share, and let's keep these voices echoing for generations to come.